Hello everyone, Storm here, and today we'll be recreating the story of Telltale's The Walking Dead, but starting out with the kids from Ericson's boarding school all the way back in Season 1. This means we'll have Marlon, Lewis, Violet, and even other characters we never saw alive like Miss Martin. Now this topic has been covered on the channel before, but after taking it down I've decided to remake and kind of remaster the story, so this will hopefully be just as fresh and enjoyable to returning viewers as it is to new ones. But with that, let's begin with our setup. The story will begin right from the first episode as Glenn's scavenging run puts him at Ericson's boarding school instead of the motel we know from the OG game. And since we know from episode 2 that a lot of the nearby land is forest, we can kinda just remove the motel entirely and say this is where Glenn ends up. Perhaps he's chased by walkers there or sees lots of stopped or totaled cars given how many of the adults tried to flee the school. Anyway, Glenn stumbles by looking for gas and other stuff and hears lots of screaming coming from the back of the school grounds. He makes his way there and finds adults and kids fleeing from the dead. One of the adults, Miss Martin, tells everyone to go to the basement of the school and lock the door. But that's when another adult hands her a young kid and says he's sorry before running away from the school. During this rush, Glenn sees two young girls helping a younger boy into the basement, that being Sophie, Minnie, and Ten. Glenn also finds a young boy carrying an even younger one on his back, which is Mitch and Willie. He sees the undead approaching and Miss Martin stumbles into him questioning who he is and how he got there. But before he can really answer, they're forced to get into the basement and Glenn helps jam the door. Miss Martin is now left with the insane task of calming down 42 children, and Glenn has been drafted into it now that he's a new friendly face. Of course, some kids show more grit than others like Marlon, Violet, Mitch, and Sophie, but others need more specific attention like Ruby, whom Miss Martin is closest to. Willie, Ten, and Brody are also helped by Mitch, Sophie, and Marlon, while Minnie is helped by Violet. Glenn radios to Lee his location and that he might need some help. Lee and Carly make their way there to the school, sneaking and killing the walkers nearby. They then open the basement doors, finding Glenn. The two are happy to see him, but he reveals that he's not alone, and that's when Lee and Carly see all the kids along with Miss Martin. She thanks the two profusely and also cites Glenn as a very helpful guy. The group learns about the school and how every adult just abandoned the kids, or did it already by that point, with her being the last one. Glenn tells Lee that Miss Martin wants to arrange a trade, some supplies from their drugstore for food from the school. Anyway, Lee, Carly, and Glenn are forced to head back to their group at the drugstore, but Miss Martin tells them that they're all welcome to bring their group. She really shouldn't be the only one keeping an eye on these kids until the government gets all this sorted out. Glenn notes this place could be good for their little group, but the back wall has a huge breach. Miss Martin tells them the school was undergoing some construction when all this started. And by the way, this breach in the back of the school was based on what Kent Mutil, a director of the game, said about the school. There was some sort of big hole that was deemed unsafe and was blocked off at some point, which makes sense given how massive the school really is. Anyway, as our group is about to leave, Lewis walks up to Glenn asking if he's going to come back, and Glenn hesitantly says yes. Our trio then heads back to the drugstore, managing to get everyone out of there and giving the details of the boarding school. Carly/Doug still ends up dead sadly, and Glenn decides to depart with one of the cars he found outside on the way to the school. He feels bad for leaving the kids behind like the rest of the adults did, but he thinks they're in good hands now. And he's got people out there he doesn't want to leave behind. So Glenn says his goodbye, wishing everyone his best. With so many kids around, some of the older ones become attached to our main group over time. Obviously Ruby as Miss Martin, but I think Lewis would pair well with Doug and Violet with Carly. But since you can only have one, you could just say Lewis and Violet both bond with whoever it is. We know Lewis and Violet were close friends anyway, so that makes sense. Violet would totally vibe with Carly's rebel attitude, and Lewis would probably just think she's attractive. As for Doug, Violet might enjoy that he's quiet, while Lewis can bring out his goofier side. Kenny and Katja would be closer to Mitch and Brody, with Willie coming along with Mitch. I just think Mitch's brash, rebellious nature would agree with Kenny in a lot of his spouts with Lily. Brody, however, is in need of a calming and understanding presence, and Katja can totally be that for her like she was with Clementine in the original. And I think Willie would also remind Kenny and Katja of a young Duck, since they're both very quirky. Duck would also enjoy being around these three, and could bond with them really well. As for Lily, we've got Marlon, since he's the most mature out of all the kids, and being the oldest, he'd want to become a good leader for them, should it come to that. He'd definitely admire Lily's intelligence and how she plans everything out, like rations and rules. After he joins the group, Mark would be paired with a sim feeling like his intelligence and ideas are actually valued with Mark. There's some cut content from the final season about a sim wanting to have salt as a currency from the new world, and I think that's a little bit weird for like a nearly adult sim, but for a younger version, I mean, yeah, that totally works. Even Larry would have the company of Omar, since he's got to be looking out for the kids, and Omar is just so quiet. As for Sophie, Minnie, and Ten, well, they're kind of in their own little group as siblings, with Violet being their friend as well. A sim in Mitch's handiwork would lead to a Bell security system like Doug made in the game, even if Doug died in episode 1. Now, you might think I'd want to talk about Clementine and her relationship to all these guys, but actually no. With 42 kids around, I don't think they'd all just be best friends with each other as the main cast. It's a little bit too convenient. I think I'd like it more if she was friendlier with the characters we never get to see, like the ones that are just named off by the other kids in season 4, Justin, Jasper, Aaron, Joey, etc. These dead friends by the time of season 4 would all still be alive by this point, and we obviously know nothing about them, so just imagine Clem is friends with another group of kids unrelated to our core cast. I also haven't mentioned her yet, but Rosie would totally boost morale and keep the kids entertained. Over the next 3 months, the school is mostly drained of all its food as they have to feed 42 kids along with Miss Martin and now our group, which has 2 kids, making a total of 50 people and 51 when Mark shows up. I think there would be a lot of tension between Miss Martin and Lily, since Lily would advocate for a super fair rationing system, while Miss Martin would be adamant the kids eat every day. But with 44 kids total, that food would run out fast like that. However, Miss Martin is ultimately the keeper of the school now, and making some kids go hungry every day when they have a decent supply is a hard thing to do. They decide to come to a compromise, ultimately deciding that the kids should be fed the food from the school that is currently in supply, and Miss Martin is obviously willing to cut Clem and Duck in too, since they're also kids. However, the adults, including Miss Martin herself, will have to get food from outside sources, only taking small amounts from the school as necessary. Mark is mentioned to have some supplies whenever he first joined the group, so that would definitely help out with that endeavor, but like I said, our group would still be starving by the time episode 2 comes around because of how fast the rations are going. Since Lee never went to the motel, he'd never find his iconic fire axe, and instead he'd have a bow and arrow taken from the school. The adults and some of the older kids would learn archery to keep themselves safe, but also to hunt. Either Kenny or Larry would suggest they start teaching Rosie how to hunt, but Miss Martin would rather keep Rosie at the school to keep the kids occupied and happy. Since Mark and Kenny are on the hunting mission in episode 2, we'll say Asim and Mitch are with them. With there being 3 adults there and it just being a simple hunting party, I think it'd be totally okay to have the kids out. They want to be able to catch enough food for the whole group, and the kids should be able to learn before their own supplies at the school are completely gone. We'll also throw Sophie here too, since Lee needs a buddy and Minerva is said to be scared of violence and killing walkers before joining the Delta. I can only imagine a much younger version of herself would feel the same. With the group trying to conserve ammo and also teach the kids, the bird Mark finds would be a target for Sophie and Asim's arrow. Oh, this also prevents the walkers from hearing gunfire, making the kids safer. Anyway, the two fire their arrows, with Lee being able to guide Sophie like he does with Clem's gun in episode 3. If he doesn't give her the right adjustment, Asim lands the shot, but if he does, then Sophie lands it. Either way, they got the bird. They then rush to Kenny's aid, only to find Ben, Travis, and Mr. Parker there too. Since they don't have anything to cut Mr. Parker's leg with, he'd be left to die in all versions, or maybe mercy killed. Travis would also end up shot and taken back to the school with Ben. Miss Martin and Katja, who are pretty close friends now, work together to treat Travis's wound, but a gunshot like this is kind of severe. Ben would be weirded out by the school setting, as it really just reminds him of where he came from, and if you know the story with that, then yeah, it'd be pretty bad for him. Since Clementine and Duck are being fed the school supplies, Lee wouldn't need to worry about feeding them when Lily hands out the rations. Miss Martin would become a new option though, and would also encourage Katja to eat if she refuses Lee's offer. Sadly, Travis does still die, and Ben reveals that the bite doesn't turn you. The St. Johns show up outside the school, asking if they'd like to trade some fuel for some food. Now, while the school has 52 mouths to feed, Lily and our core group are really thinking about their own stomachs. Since the separation of food to the kids was agreed upon, Miss Martin actually has no say in whether this offer applies to the kids, even if the school's rations are beginning to dwindle. Lee, Mark, Carly/Doug, and Ben are sent out on this little quest with the St. Johns to scout the place out. Mark still ends up shot with an arrow, and a lot of the episode goes the same. When the whole crew shows up, they'd have their little buddies with them, since it was deemed safe. Though I do think Lewis would be the one going instead of Violet, since Violet likes Minnie and her siblings. Asim is worried about Mark, and this is when we'd see Mitch, Willie, Brody, and Omar actually begin bonding with Clementine. Marlon and Violet would also be keeping their distance for the most part, since they are sort of doubting the quality of this new place. Marlon because he feels the unfair burden of wanting to keep the group safe, and Violet just because she's unwilling to let people into her life. When the salt lick moment happens, Asim would be very enthusiastic about it, suggesting they bring it home and start as new currency. Lee can either shut the idea down, say it's a great idea, or dismiss it by saying the St. Johns probably need the salt lick. Marlon, looking out for the group, wants to help Kenny and Lee root around with the locked door. So they let him distract Andy by talking, but he kinda fails since he's a little nervous. The dinner table would be entirely full, with the St. Johns and some of the adults giving up their seats to let the kids sit. Omar, Asim, and Marlon would all be specific people who'd wash their hands, since Marlon is still wanting to look around, and the other two have specific desires to be clean based on their character. Marlon does kind of prove himself, as Lee meets him when leaving to wash his own hands, and the boy tells him a shelf upstairs has a cord beneath it. Lee goes to check it out, finding Mark before rushing down the stairs and telling everyone what is happening. Duck, Brody, and Katja are kept by the St. John's, while they store everyone else in a meat locker. I am assuming Duck was taken so it'd be easier for the St. John's to get Katja to do what they want as a vet, and since Brody is so close to Katja, they take her too. When the Larry situation starts happening, Marlon, Mitch, and Violet are very outspoken, with Violet not wanting to let Larry just be murdered, while Mitch wants to keep the group safe at all costs. And Marlon wants to give Larry a chance to wake up. Omar, Asim, and Willie are all just kinda scared like Clementine though, so they're not active at all. No matter what, Kenny does kill Larry, though Marlon tries to physically stop him to no avail. Being the youngest going through all this traumatizing stuff so quickly, Willie begins wailing loudly, and Mitch tries to calm him down, feeling kinda guilty for pushing the situation to escalate. Marlon is also crying beside Lily, as he feels like he couldn't help her when she needed it. Lee can check up on all the kids, but they're all super shaken up about this, while Mitch is focused on keeping Willie quiet. Violet is shedding tears and shaken, but she's seen her own grandmother's death, so she's a little familiar with this. Anyway, Lee eventually gets the vent open, and can choose to make Clementine, Violet, or Marlon go through the vent. Marlon, since he's the oldest and most active leader type, Violet because she's the most stable, and Clem because Lee knows her best and might want to get her mind off what just occurred. The chosen child manages to get the door open, and the group continues forward. However, Lily stays with her father and the majority of the kids. This means it'd really just be Lee, Kenny, Marlon, and Violet going out. Since there are 3 weapons for Lee to pick, Marlon and Violet will take the 2 Lee doesn't choose. Kenny automatically gets a sickle, since if Lee has the sickle, Danny throws it away, and yet Kenny still has one. So I guess there was just an extra one that Kenny grabbed immediately and we didn't see it. Anyway, since Lily has the kids to watch over, she wouldn't come to save Lee. Instead, it'd be Marlon, who respects Lee trying to help Lily save Larry, or Violet, since Marlon would again hesitate to act if Lee did nothing. And if Lee killed Larry, then obviously Kenny would still attack instead. Danny would still get caught in a bear trap, and Lee has to choose whether or not to kill him in front of Marlon and Violet as Kenny runs off. Lee then tells the 2 to hang back and keep the others safe while he and Kenny handle things. Lee eventually runs into Carly/Doug and Ben and saves Katja from Brenda. Kenny gets shot by Andy and Lee beats him in a fight. Lily eventually gets the rest of the kids out with the group and all of them leave the dairy. Upon finding the car filled with the supplies, Mitch and Marlon would want to take the stuff, while Violet and Asim don't. Both of them are thinking about the possible owner of the vehicle, and Clem, being the first to speak up about it, makes them not want to. When everyone gets back, Miss Martin is horrified at what occurred, and she really doesn't want the kids going out again. At the very least, they got a decent amount of food and supplies out of the car, so that's good. The horror of what happened there really draws Mitch and Willie closer, along with Marlon and Brody. Marlon feels like he wasn't able to keep Brody safe, and he feels bad about that. In episode 3, Lee would have the choice to tell Miss Martin about his crime if Carly is still alive. She's willing to let it be, appreciating that Lee would tell her that information willingly, since she's really watching over the kids. Lee could also try to convince her to let some of the older kids go out again, as they could use the help and some of them are pretty strong. Miss Martin doesn't agree though, as she sees the toll it had after the dairy. Brody's a mess, Violet and Asim are more withdrawn, Omar is quieter, and Marlon and Mitch are martyring themselves to keep everyone calm. Miss Martin knows a time must come when they have to be ready for the world, but it's just not here yet. Lee investigates the missing supplies with Duck, and Willie also joins too because, you know, they're kind of closely linked at this point. As Lee reports what he found, bandits enter through the hole in the back of the school, quickly forcing the adults to their knees. Lily still saves the group by shooting one of the bandits. With the much larger area and the weak point in the back, the bandits are able to do some real damage, killing a bunch of the kids. The walkers would also make their way through the breach, devouring anyone they find. Miss Martin makes a valiant effort to keep as many of her kids safe as she can, but she is shot in the stomach area as she defends Ruby. Marlon, Violet, Asim, and Mitch arm themselves and fight to protect each other, with Mitch and Marlon being able to kill a bandit each, while the others take out walkers. Violet saves Minnie, while Asim and Marlon help the wounded Miss Martin to the school bus. And yeah, we're saying there's a bus to replace the RV in this scenario because, I mean, that just makes sense. Plus, we got a lot of people, okay? I don't want to pack them all in the RV. Rosie is also there, mostly just running from all the loud noises as she hasn't been trained to handle combat situations. Now, this is where I pull a kind of Giga Chad move and say that all 30 of the faceless kids are killed by bandits, walkers, or just go missing during the carnage. Obviously, I'm not just going to try and write 30 extra characters into the story or try to write any of them, really. We already have 12 additional characters to work with here with the main core cast from season 4, and 13 if you count Miss Martin. But, since I am doing that, I'll make a gracious trade and say that Duck being bitten doesn't happen. It makes sense to kill 30 faceless characters, but to still have Duck die on top of that, which eventually, leads to Katja death, just doesn't seem plausible to me. And the only reason I'm really killing all these characters at once isn't because I think that's the most likely thing, it's just because it's possible, and obviously I don't want to try and write these characters who don't really exist. And the big brain fans know that this also saves Katja too, so it's a pretty good deal. Anyway, our 22 characters pack themselves into the school bus, and Miss Martin is surrounded by the kids as she struggles for consciousness. Rosie nestles her nose against Miss Martin before being led aside so that Katja can try and save her. Katja does her best work with her, forcing Ruby to help her. Lily pushes to tease out who the traitor is and continues when Kenny hits a walker, forcing them to stop. The adults step outside with the exception of Katja along with Miss Martin and the kids. Sadly, Lily would still shoot Carly/Doug, causing some of the kids to run outside. Minerva, Mitch, Lewis, Violet, Asim, and Marlon all see the dead body, and Lee holding Lily to the school bus. Kenny tells everyone to get back inside now before telling Lee that they're leaving Lily. With 19 people already in there and a dog, they don't have the space or supplies, and with all the kids, they can't risk anything. Plus, Kenny is the one who got the school bus working, so if Lee disagrees, he can tell him he can stay out there with her, and that forces Lee to leave her anyway. As the group leaves in the school bus, Lee takes a look at Katja and Ruby's work at Miss Martin, but it isn't having much effect. As she's about to pass, she tells Lee that the time is coming. He apologizes to her, but she says she's not talking about her time. She's talking about the conversation they had before. When she said the kids have to be ready for the world, but not yet, she was wrong. The time is coming, and she needs Lee to help them reach that point before... Miss Martin struggles in pain, cutting off her sentence, but Lee knows what she's talking about. She holds Lee's hand before finally going, much to the kids' discomfort. Katja cries as she goes up to sit with Kenny, and Lee approaches her after talking to some of the kids. Lee tries to comfort Katja, but she admits she could have done better. But after seeing all the bloodshed of children at the school raid, she just wasn't all there. And now she feels like she's to blame for Miss Martin's death too. Kenny obviously tells her not to worry about it and that it isn't their fault. If it was their kid, he might not even be able to drive right now. Katja hears this from him and looks even more sad because of it. Lee does his best to make her feel better, but she just tells him how hard it's going to be now with so many kids. The three of them can't handle that. After some time, Lee finally goes back to sit with Clem and the rest, with Duck going up to be with his parents. The conversation about Duck turning isn't a thing this time, but Clementine is extremely sad about a lot of her friends dying or being left behind. Lee tries to tell her that they did all they could, but Clementine doesn't seem content with that answer. Lee still holds her and falls asleep before Kenny finds out that they're being blocked by a train the next day. Kenny and Lee work on getting it running while Katja tends to the kids. Luckily, Minerva is a good singer and Sophie encourages her to do it for them. At the same time, Marlon, Brody, Asim, Lewis, and Violet are trying to help Lee, or at least look around for anything useful. Lee encourages them to stay together and call for help if they need it, as he can't let them be put in peril. Asim follows Lee into the train car where they find a map and water, which Asim decides to go bring back to the others. Lewis and Violet find the tools in the train, taking the two that Lee chooses not to take. Lee lets the two make use of the weapons when they find the conductor, whom they believe is a walker, but he's just dead and the kids swing, knocking the body over. Lee travels out the side of the train, finding Marlon and Brody, who are trying to deal with a walker that's got a seatbelt on in a car. Lee finds them right as Marlon unbuckles the walker before backing up out of the car so that Brody can slam the door on it. She does so, but it's not quite strong enough, leading to the walker getting its hands on Marlon. Lee immediately comes in swinging, killing the walker with this new weapon, and Brody starts apologizing as tears run down her face, and Marlon yells at her to shut up. Lee can scrutinize Brody for not helping as much as she could have, tell Marlon to lay off, or tell both of them to calm down. Marlon does realize he was too harsh and apologizes back to Brody, hugging her and telling her that it's alright. Lee then rightfully suggests they get back to the others, and Marlon snags the animal crackers from the car, telling Brody that at least they got those. She cheers up a bit, and the two go back. After getting the notes, Lee is able to have Lewis and Violet power on the train by telling them which things to do. He later finds Asim at the back of the train car and tells him the train is still attached, which Lee already knows. Lee gets it unstuck and they meet Chuck. Asim notes to Lee that he's a weird dude, and Lee can plainly agree, hope for the best, or suggest that they're all weird now. Anyway, they get back to the rest of the group, who are now passing water, animal crackers, and candy provided by Chuck. The kids look happy for a moment. Katja does too. Because of this, she invites Chuck to stay, and Kenny instructs everyone to get on the train. But that is where we're going to end this part of What If the Ericson Boarding School was in Season 1, with the decay of the boarding school, actually. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed the story so far and are interested to see where Season 1 ends and what happens. I'm very proud of how this remaster turned out, and I hope you guys are able to enjoy it too. As always, a huge shout out to our members from the Walker tier, all of which are on screen now. Next we have the Survivor tier, Ellie the Plug, Davisville84, Aiden Kearns, Chief Strato Constituent, and Tifu A. And lastly, our Christian Man tier: Willie, Zombie Warlord, Very Classy Demon, 23 Days Later, Heliopelio, Coda Cole, Bad Opinion, Bashua, and Octavio Monreal. If you want to get access to awesome perks like early video access and exclusive community posts, then definitely make sure you become a member. But as always, tell me if you like this part, tell me what you think will happen next, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.